Hey there! San Francisco recently finished its first subway in 50 years, linking Chinatown with the rest of San Francisco's light rail streetcar network. Unfortunately, it came in over budget and with underwhelming ridership, on top of being open 4 years late. I think it would make for a rather unique case study on the high price tag for U.S. transit projects. Using the Transit Cost Project's amazing study, I'd like to break down what led to it being so expensive. Additionally, I'd like to add to the transit cost discourse the rationale behind the political decisions that can add to the total, at least for Central Subway. Not to defend the costs, but to contextualize how we arrived where we are with American transit projects being so expensive. Before talking about the Central Subway, I have to discuss this monstrosity. Take a look at the Embarka Freeway, a 1950s double-decker waterfront monstrosity that separated San Francisco from its bay. Despite various anti-freeway movements over the years, including a 1986 ballot measure that got knocked down, it survived until the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. The most recent big one damaged it structurally and compelled the city to finally tear it down in the early 1990s. While the teardown of the Embarcadero Freeway and the Embarcadero restoration has often been lauded as the greatest success story in San Francisco land use history, since this massive freeway network was stopped due to the freeway revolts of the 1950s, what is often ignored in this narrative is that the teardown was not universally supported, and many of the same groups that protested the 1986 ballot measure continue to protest the freeway's demolition until its full demise. Typically, teardown opposition comes from suburban commuters, but San Francisco politics, per usual, were anything but typical. You see, the group most concerned about the removal of the freeway were shop owners and merchants in Chinatown. Several business owners were concerned that tearing down the freeway would limit the amount of day trippers from throughout the Bay Area visiting Chinatown, because there would no longer be a freeway exit directly towards Chinatown. Instead, you would need to exit I-80 and go through a lot of downtown to get there now. In the months following the Loma Prieta earthquake, many merchants complained that the bridge being shut down significantly hurt their business's viability, and without the overpass, businesses would shutter. The standard urbanist doctrine in this situation would be to point out studies showing that this is bad thinking, and that in fact, just as one more lane doesn't help traffic, removing them doesn't cause more. Especially in this case, the removal opened up new land for housing and allowed for the expansion of the Embarcadero Freeway terminal, which led to an explosive growth in commuter ferries that were borderline non-existent before, so it seems counterintuitive to be against the teardown. However, none of that was a convincing argument to the Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, which fought aggressively against the teardown. In a contentious vote, the San Francisco supervisors voted 6-5 to tear down the freeway. The mayor at the time, Art Agnes, was rewarded for creating this sprawling new area, used by locals and tourists alike, by losing re-election and being replaced by the city's chief cop, Frank Jordan, partially due to the loss of support from groups who were against the freeway teardown. This situation really illustrates a key point I want to hone in on throughout the videos I make. San Francisco politics is nothing like the caricature you often see in the national narrative. It's often crazier, but much of that craziness doesn't look good in a clickbait article or a cable news chyron. This whole situation led a lot of groups within Chinatown to feel the need to be compensated for their main transit route being torn down. That compensation would come in the form of a proposal for a new subway to Chinatown. Yes, this is a video essay about a subway. Rose Pak. Rose Pak was a one-time journalist, lifelong politico who had considerable sway in Chinatown from the 1980s to the aughts. After spearheading efforts to try to keep the Embarcadero Freeway, she campaigned strongly and eventually succeeded in convincing the city that the way that they should pay back Chinatown for the freeway teardown was by building a subway to Chinatown. In fact, this new station is actually named after her, not without its own controversy, given how many anti-Rose Pak signs I've seen in the city over the years. Once it was clear San Francisco wanted to build a Chinatown Muni rail extension, the question became where and how to build it. The where was pretty straightforward. Because the city had already prioritized a surface line being built along the southeastern part of San Francisco, T3rd line, which happened to go through neighborhoods home to large numbers of Chinese immigrants, like Visitation Valley and Portola, who often did business, worked in, or socialized in Chinatown, it was a natural fit to make the Central Subway part of the T-line. Along its route up towards downtown, the T3rd line also crossed various neighborhoods that included many other residents who have historically had limited access to transit. Building a line along the alignment shown here, up 4th Street and then up Stockton, with stops in Chinatown, Union Square, a large shopping district, seemed like the clearest answer to the city for the underground section's alignment. How it got built is where some of the politically motivated cost increases came in. Often when discussing the construction of transit projects, cut and cover is a common method mentioned that is often a cheaper way of building underground projects versus exclusively using tunnel boring machines. Politically, though, cut and cover is effectively a non-starter in San Francisco. It was a method used down Market Street during BART's construction, and many businesses afterwards complained that tearing apart the main street of the city severely hurt their businesses, to the point where they had to shutter before they had a chance to recover. Using cut and cover for the Central Subway received a similarly strong response from shop owners, not unlike that of the freeway teardown. Their argument was that to use the more cost-effective cut and cover construction would negatively hurt them and lead to businesses shutting down, outweighing the cost of building the project in the first place. Because of this, cut and cover's usage was limited to station construction. The Transit Cost Project, in its case study of the New York 2nd Avenue Subway project, noted that tunneling is often one of the first areas that drive up transit costs and can often lead to escalating transit costs elsewhere. Why cities specifically choose the more expensive method is complicated. This could be a whole video on its own, but I would say that, politically, in San Francisco, this type of messaging of, "it will hurt small businesses," is much more persuasive than the arguments of transit nerds on YouTube, despite our best efforts. The recent parking dispute along Geary is a great example of this. Business owners were able to get the city to give back parking spots eliminated for a transit project due to lobbying for businesses, despite Geary having one of the busiest bus lines in the city with fairly high frequency. Additionally worth noting, the alignment of Central Subway would be impossible to build entirely cut and cover, since it goes underneath BART and goes up some defensive hills. So there is an argument to be made that there are limits when it comes to how much cut and cover could have saved in construction costs in this situation. Another area the Transit Cost Project notes that can cause soaring costs is by overbuilding stations, especially a big problem if you aren't building a super high volume transit system. Riding the Central Subway to its 3 underground stations, it is very clear that it did this to a T. These grand stations are for 2-car light rail trains, which are fairly short. Full-length mezzanine? You got it. Extra deep stations? Check. Oh, and probably the worst part? All 3 stops are built completely differently, with a lot of surface-level building structures. A much smarter plan would have been to maybe scale down these overkill stations' surface footprint and mezzanine-level footprints, and to build them with slightly longer platforms so they could support 3-car trains to carry more people. So why did we do this? Well, partially because people asked for it. Take Chinatown's station design as an example. Wouldn't it be a lot cheaper to build under Stockton Street and have entrances more like these in New York, London, or these in San Francisco, all of which are still wheelchair accessible due to elevators? Well, SFMTA asked the community what they wanted, and the community pointed out, hey, this is a very high density neighborhood with limited community spaces. Can you build a park on top of the station? Which is a well-used park in my experience. I had to film at a really early hour. But definitely building a station both this tall and this deep underground added costs which took away from other transit projects. Additionally, the goal of the project ultimately was to help create more equity by connecting multiple working class groups of color, so going cheap on station design could be possibly seen as a slight. Oh, and quick fun side story, and a level of peak absurdity. When the city was planning on extracting the tunnel boring machine in North Beach, a neighborhood north of Chinatown, they had to extract the tunnel boring machine at a specific off-street site due to local protests because, according to activists, up to 60% of all businesses in the neighborhood were at risk of financial ruin if they exited in the originally planned, more cost-effective spot on Columbus Avenue. So the city bought a historic theater, tore it down, then removed the machine. Then, in a rare case of bizarre double NIMBY, separate groups in North Beach also convinced the city not to build a North Beach station, even though the tunnels were already built because of the extraction. Because of that, to this day, there's still no North Beach station, even though the neighborhood has started to lean towards having a subway station. It's likely another 10 years before North Beach gets a station at a much higher price tag. Getting back to possible cost problems, procurement was also a large issue. I am no expert on the specifics of the dispute with the contractor, but I do know that due to state laws, San Francisco is forced to accept the lowest bidder, which came from a company that, allegedly, uses various tactics to underbid, predictably creating a lot of headaches in their wake. One famous example is that, again, allegedly, the contractor used the wrong steel for the tracks, which seems like a kind of odd mistake to make to me. Regardless, there's definitely areas of improvement in how California selects contractors for transit projects. With that out of the way, what could we have gained if we just built it in a more cost-effective way? Well, if the Central Subway's costs were, say, 40% lower than the final cost, like the initial full budget it was given, it would have been built several years earlier without suffering delay due to the lack of funding. Additionally, it would have been a lot easier to build the proposed extensions down to North Beach and Fisherman's Wharf, which are now kind of a pipe dream because of the potential costs. Ultimately, we accepted a trade-off of nicer stations built in a way more convenient for nearby businesses, in exchange for a shorter subway line and at much higher build costs. And I think if the city was looking to build another large transit project today, they'd still pick the same trade-offs. Right now, though, you know what does go frequently? The already existing 30 and 45 bus lines that go parallel to the central subway. What routes have had great COVID recovery? The 30 and 45. So people clearly want to travel along this route, they just see the longer wait times and extra obstacles getting in and out of deep stations and decide to just use the existing bus line. Well, there's a lot of important context, such as San Francisco's downtown recovery being so slow, muni budgets which are slowly being resolved, plus buses being free for a lot of people. I still think it's fair to say that the cost overruns had some level of impact on funding for service frequency. This all comes back to one basic question. What can we learn from all this, and what can the city do? My view is that until you get costs under control, you should hold off on building large-scale projects like this. In San Francisco's case, there's just so many more cost-effective projects that we should be looking into until we can sit down and really control costs on bigger projects, such as safe streets, protected bike lanes, protected bus lanes, more buses. I don't know, buses are good. There's a proposal for another new subway, the Geary 19th Avenue project. I don't think the city should really look into this until it handles its residential zoning policy and covers a lot more cost-effective ways to improve transit. I worry what will happen is instead of learning lessons, we just nosedive into using federal and state grants mixed in with general funds and just sink $1 billion into expanding the subway line one more mile to Fisherman's Wharf and also getting lackluster ridership in return. Only around $124 million of the cost for the project came from city voters, with the vast majority of funding for the central subway coming from federal and state grants, which, while great, has a disadvantage of making it easy to ignore costs. Because of all of this, until we take a look at how many other countries more successfully built transit and apply these cost-saving advantages, I'd rather we just focus on what we can do right. Now, if we're able to shift costs down on subways, then it starts to make a lot more sense to build more. But until we address that, I'd honestly say Muni should stop trying to build new subways. Yes, I'd love a B. Geary line. Yes, I'd love for the central subway to go all the way to the Presidio. But guess what I would love even more? More frequent service and a functioning transit system. I'd rather have a fully fleshed out bike network and more frequent buses because those provide the most service for less cost than a fancy project that gets approved because it makes for a politician-friendly ribbon-cutting ceremony. I hope you enjoyed this video. I plan to cover more topics related to this and try to dig deeper into some of the unique transit and politics of San Francisco and California. I think it gets covered through the media, but I think not a lot of people try to dig deeper into the why and how it all ended up in its current situation. I'd also be remiss not acknowledging that this video covers a transit topic that's construction was tied pretty specifically to the residents of Chinatown, who have their own long and complex history, and I recommend reading first-person accounts of their unique history and the various views within the community, which is by no means a monolith. I'd also be remiss not to point out the irony that Chinatown is one of the most car-centric neighborhoods in the city, with 0 pedestrian streets and no slow streets, even though many streets were laid before the prevalence of cars, and the sidewalks are regularly crowded to the curb with pedestrians and tourists. The recent success of the Chinatown night market shows that there's definitely a demand for more pedestrian-friendly experiences there. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe. I plan to do more videos on transit-related topics in San Francisco, California, the US, and the world. Oh, also, I got an editor finally, so expect video uploads to become faster and more consistent, aiming to hopefully move to a monthly schedule starting next video and slowly progressing better. Anyway, till next time.